I'm particularly attentive to what it takes to address this tendency toward equilibrium in the everyday lives of ordinary people, not people who are spending their lives in the midst of activism. Those folks who care, but who aren't deeply engaged. What habits of practice and habits of mind help those of us in that category stave off learning to live with things we shouldn't? And to model those practices and habits of mind, I can't help but turn to my home state. Those of you with fewer connections to Minnesota likely paid attention to the state twice in the last decade. In the aftermath of George Floyd's murder in 2020, and during the resistance to ICE this past January, maybe also when Tim Walz was chosen as vice presidential candidate. If that's you, then you, perhaps like the Trump administration, might have been surprised that a state known for passive-aggressive nice and frigid temperatures would be the site of such powerful, widespread, and effective civic action. Those of us with more connections to the North Star State, I know of only one here, won't deny the perils of nice or the need for heated socks and wool hats. But many of us weren't surprised at all when nice, and also actual ice, foiled ice. Just watch that forever. Minnesota communities, and perhaps particularly the Twin Cities metro area, have for decades nurtured the networks and affiliations that made quick action and sustained attention possible. They are home to community-based non-governmental organizations, nonprofits, with wide constituencies that have built robust networks among themselves and that pursue social justice through both radical and institutionalist pathways. There are major left radical activist organizations in the cities that are household names thanks to their decades of visibility. And there are equally well-known progressive advocacy groups that have built phenomenal social capital over their years of work for policy change through the system. Metro area cities are famously divided into neighborhoods with strong local identities, and those neighborhoods are supported and coordinated by neighborhood organizations with boards and professional staff that are either funded by the cities or incorporated as nonprofits themselves. Religious organizations, including the country's largest concentration of progressive Protestant congregations, and their members have traditionally seen care for neighbors as part of their sacred mission, and they maintain strong connections with both NGOs and neighborhood organizations. In fact, in the city of St. Paul, the neighborhood organizations explicitly list religious organizations as constituents of the neighborhoods. The metro area is home to the nation's largest urban Native American population that has developed its own strong community organizations and has a history of consequential action dating back to at least the 1960s. You may recall that AIM was founded in Minneapolis in 1968, and Clyde Bellencourt, one of the major figures, was from Minneapolis. And that reputation for nice, despite a real problem with passive aggressiveness, it's also undergirded by an abiding sense of neighborliness and of responsibility for and to those neighbors. For many Minnesotans, the Norwegian American white moderates who Trump expected to sit by, the Somali American citizens he denigrated so freely, and more, being a good neighbor, being a Minnesotan, is being a good neighbor in word and deed. So in my quest to understand the habits of mind and practice that allow ordinary people to notice a problem before it becomes a problem and to sustain attention to the problem over the long haul, this context for what happened in the Twin Cities this past January is both essential and illustrative. And it's a telling contrast to my colleagues' certainty that they would never be offered. Instead, it's built on the assumption that even recognizing how privilege protects some of us and makes others of us more vulnerable, still any one of us could be Offred, and all of us are Offred's neighbors. What happened in the cities needed the activists and professional advocates, the people who by avocation or role keep their eyes focused on matters of social change day in and day out, whose social networks are built around organizing, whose radical credentials are clear, and whose attention hasn't wavered. These leaders were clued in, connected, and ready to go when ICE arrived. Their vocation helped keep civic equilibrium at bay. But the response also needed those people whose daily activities put their attention elsewhere, who work at Target or Delta or 3M, whose family responsibilities fill their evenings, who voted for Minneapolis Mayor Jacob Fry's re-election because he was the most moderate candidate. In the cities, many of these people were also already part of the network of neighborhood, religious, and community organizations I just described. They might be on the mailing list for Isaiah or for Heart of the Beast Theater. They might go to services on Saturday or Sunday. They talked to their neighbors. They attended local festivals. They applied to their neighborhood organization for rental assistance, or they helped clear the local skating rink of snow. They weren't particularly ready for action. They weren't particularly paying attention, but they were connected by interwoven strands of life in common. They may have been in a state of equilibrium, but the scales were in a position to tip. And they did. Neighbors stepped up in ways that fit their skills, inclinations, and life circumstances. For heaven's sake, my almost 80-year-old mother bagged food to deliver to kids for a couple months on end. My sister, who I adore and who has very progressive values, but is always the one who says, it's going to be okay and we'll vote for the Democrats, organized food drives, right? So ordinary people who are not known for their activism, even if they are left-leaning people, part of this and important. So they stepped up. They responded to the crisis. And many of them are still actively doing that now months later, working to ease the lingering effects of the surge. And then most of those folks will return to their daily lives, to equilibrium. But they'll still be connected, and they won't have acquiesced to authoritarianism. They will have actually built a little bit of resilience against it. So what's the lesson here? What's the takeaway for rhetoricians, other than a reminder to keep an eye on job postings in Minnesota? That's my answer. At the top of the talk, I framed equilibrium and its rhetorical problems as a feature of human individuals, or perhaps concatenations of individuals. Noticing, likewise, I framed initially as a habit of mind cultivated by individuals. But the fact is, the only way that I can see to address the rhetorical problems posed by our deeply human tendency toward equilibrium is through another deeply human tendency, our nature as social creatures. And rhetoric is right in the middle of that human tendency, too. I mean, we can go all the way back to Socrates and the hymn to Logos for this point. Now, the classical rhetoricians who actually speak Greek are going to have to check me on this, but here's my take. My previous encounters with this famous line from the hymn to Logos have focused on Socrates' point that language and rhetoric made civilization possible, and that Logos is what distinguishes humans from other animals. And I'm pretty sure that is more or less what Socrates was saying. But as I was coming to the end of this talk, Socrates' words came back to me with a different emphasis. We come together. Or in another translation, we join together. Now, we could approach this joining together in coalitional terms, what Karma Chavez defines as a present vision and practice that is oriented toward others and a shared commitment to social and political change, in which groups and individuals acting on different but intersecting aspects of a problem come together to act. But that, as Chavez herself notes, requires constant work if it is to endure. So coalition, as Chavez defines it, is an essential piece of what happened in Minnesota and of any effort to stave off equilibrium. But on its own, coalition quickly gets us back to the core problem I started with. It assumes engagement already exists and is sustained. But where joining together seems to me to imply active coalition, and by the way, I'm not making a point about a translation of Greek here. I have no idea which of these is closer. Coming together hints at another possibility, at the latent potential of being in shared space, semi-intentionally connected to one another. And here, as I was writing, I found myself hearkening back to the very first scholarly book I ever read of my own volition, which was Jane Jacobs' The Death and Life of the Great American City, and her arguments about how neighborhood life is sustained by daily interactions. Sharing community with others through bonds loose and tight and everything in between. We learn to notice that which might otherwise escape our attention. Sharing community with others, giving and receiving stories, we maintain awareness of what might otherwise be lost. Sharing community with others, stepping up and stepping back, we keep active engagement despite the pull of exhaustion and normalcy. This is not utopia, some magical community where everybody gets along and shares the same goals and we are together, but in fact, it has more in common with the fraught sociality of a small town where everybody knows your business. It always runs the risk of complacency, of civic equilibrium. It requires intention and a critical mass of organizations and networks that can maintain higher alert on any given point. But it also requires another critical mass of people, those who cultivate latent networks and habituated attention, even while going about ordinary lives doing other things. It has the advantage of being something that we do and have done quite literally since the beginning of human time. We come together in communities, including communities of difference. And now, more than ever, we need to cultivate that ordinary, extraordinary practice.